Can we give another round of applause for Sam for all the work that he's doing for our kids? I speak for all of us, Sam. We're really thankful, but I'm a little upset because I don't know how I'm supposed to follow that up and talk. But I think he did a good job introducing the idea that data are really important for clinical trials, and particularly we're going to be focusing on natural history studies in this talk. There we go. All right, so what we're going to talk about today is the idea of, what is a clinical trial? We've heard that word thrown around a lot. What does it actually look like? What is a natural history study? Again, a term that you guys have heard a lot about, and hopefully you're getting a greater understanding, but I'm going to tell you a little bit about what it means and why you should care. And then hopefully by the end of this, you're chomping at the bit and you're saying, what can I actually do to help? So that's the hope, is that we're engaging the community here to really support our work, which helps support the work that you're hearing about today. What is a clinical trial? Clinical trial is something that a medication, whether it's a pill or a syrup or an injection, it answers the question of, is this medication safe and is it effective for a specific condition? Those are the two things that we keep trying to emphasize, safety and efficacy. Both are very, very important. Nobody wants to put a drug into a kid that's going to be harmful, and nobody wants to put a kid through a drug that isn't going to work. So there's a lot of safeguards in place to test, is a drug safe and is it effective? Clinical trials have phases. So you may have seen this with different announcements for other drugs that come out. There's phase 1, which is the first most important case. Is it safe? Put it in different doses, make sure there's no adverse effects. Phase 2, does this drug actually work? In this case, I told you yesterday, I'm a scientist, I speak in graphs, and so I'll explain these, but we're gonna have some more throughout the talk. Let's say you're looking at a biomarker that is high in a control or neurotypical population. In the patient group, it's much lower. Let's take a look and see if, does it work? Does that biomarker start to go up towards neurotypical levels after treatment? This could be a behavior, this could be something in blood. Do we know if this treatment actually does what it's supposed to do? Phase 3 is another granular approach, and it says, is it better than what's available on the market now? So let's say there's a drug already for blood pressure. Does this new blood pressure medication work a little bit better than the one there? So you can start to compare it to other drugs. And then phase 4 is looking at what happens over time. What are the long-term effects of this drug beyond the initial clinical trial? Now, some of you may be thinking, well, Dylan, there's no old drug for Dup15q. We have nothing to compare it to. This is a pipeline that exists broadly in the clinical space, but in the rare disease space, there's a lot of adjustments and things that can change and modulate because we've got a really small patient community, and we're looking at, frankly, a field where we don't know what that ASO or what that treatment could do for our kids. So there's a lot of adjustments to the general pipeline that we see in the rare disease space to accommodate families and make sure that it is safe and efficacious and it actually works in our kids to the best of our ability to test. So that's a broad picture of a clinical trial, but what actually leads to a clinical trial? I think that's what we're all wanting to see as a clinical trial start. The first step is that a clinical trial can only begin when there's been sufficient preclinical, so before you go into patients, safety and efficacy. Is it safe and does it work? Phase 1 oftentimes is the first time a drug goes into a patient population, right? And again, this is why there is so much time and effort, work, and money that goes into ensuring that we know that a drug, to the best of our ability before we put it into a patient, is safe and that it's going to be worthwhile. Keep in mind that there's a partnership. We've got companies that are developing drugs, and they want a drug to succeed, and they want it to be safe. And we've got clinicians that care about patient safety, do no harm. They're not going to put a patient through a clinical trial and all the assessments and things like that unless they believe that it is safe. And so there's effort from all parties to make sure, first and foremost, safe. And the last point I want to highlight here is that companies don't just walk into a clinic and hand them a drug. There's a lot of regulatory processes that take time, and they're very, very expensive to prove to the FDA and the governing bodies that this drug is worth testing. You have to prove this. And a lot of this proof comes from, we heard mouse models, we hear about rats, we hear about cells. Those are things that can be done from the drug perspective. But there's a really valuable piece of data that the companies can't do on their own. And if you haven't noticed, the theme of this conference is the power of the parents, and the fact is that the patient population is essential for generating a huge amount of data that are going to be important for clinical trials to even start. If you haven't got the buzzword already, we're talking about natural history studies. So I live in New York right now, and when I think about natural history, this is what I think about. For those of you who aren't in New York, this is from the American Museum of Natural History. This is a giant blue whale that they have in there, and I remember as a kid going on field trips and learning about what happened across the earth, how whales changed over time, and that's understanding the natural history of animals and the earth. But whales are actually kind of a good analogy for what a natural history study looks like. You think about some of the documentaries with the British narrators who are talking about the whales in the wild. Those are observational studies. They're documenting whales in their natural environment, and they're understanding what is this whale doing. It's longitudinal. We're looking at whales from birth through adulthood. And ideally, it's great when you find a whale, Jessie, oh, we see Jessie's birth, that's great. And we can see Jessie growing up and making friends and growing into an adult whale, finding a mate. Those are the documentaries that really get at you. Because it's longitudinal, you track a story over time, and that's more impactful. Additionally, these studies can look at different aspects of the whales, kind of the science behind it. You know, how do they communicate with each other? How strong do they get? When do they learn to breach out of the water? And in a documentary, this is good and informative for you to learn more about whales, but this is kind of a similar framework as to how we can inform companies and the FDA about what does Dup15q look like. Let's observe our patient population. We saw the parade yesterday, and I'm sure that made an impact on a lot of you just like it did on me. We have a wide range of abilities within our kids, and it can't just be measured in one way. We want to observe our kids with a bunch of different measures so that we can really capture all of their abilities and understand what's important to families. Longitudinal data is really important, so rather than just seeing your kid one time, we want to track how's your kid develop from 6 years old to 7 years old to 8 years old. And we want to do that across the lifespan. We want to understand older kids, younger kids, infants. We want to understand the whole trajectory. And importantly, we need a lot of measures. We need to understand if we can quantify these things. We hear so many emotional stories about the things that you can't quantify. And those are where the parent voices become really, really important, both to the FDA and to companies. But they also need some quantifiable hard data to go with in addition to the anecdotes. In the Dup15q population, I alluded to the fact that we have a really diverse group of kids who are so amazing in every single way. We want to understand how does this population change over time. So if we can track kids, even just on a yearly basis over time, what skills are they gaining? Where are they plateauing? Are there any regressions? And how consistent is that across our group? Ultimately, from a natural history study, our hope is that we can start to create these little bins of kids that kind of develop or behave similarly and understand maybe, oh, this predisposes a child to be more beneficially reactive to a certain medication. Maybe it means that this specific type of physical therapy would be more impactful on this population. Or really importantly, maybe if we give this medication, it's likely to have an adverse effect, and so we should consider other options. These are important things that you can glean in the future of a natural history study once we start to accumulate all of these data. Thankfully, we at the Alliance are very well supported. We have 2 natural history studies that are ongoing, and you've heard them a lot, and we will continue to talk about them because they are extremely important to what we're doing. Citizen Health is running a natural history study that's electronic, and I'll go into a little bit about what that means. And then we also have the SOAR study being run by our team with Charlotte DeStefano and Shefali Jeste, which are looking at some of the behavioral and metrics, cognitive metrics that we want to see in our kids. How does Citizen Health run their natural history study? Citizen Health is a very creative approach to the big question of natural history because, I mean, you guys probably can't count the number of times that you've gone to see a doctor or gone to the emergency room or gotten a new test result. It's innumerable. Citizen Health uses a platform where they are able to combine all of your provider data, whether it's from a trip to the ER, whether it's your genetic test result, whether it's a blood panel, or whether it's a survey that you fill out. They're able to combine all that data in one accessible place. And I know you guys, you've got each of your different specialists, and the data don't always talk to each other. The records aren't linked up. It's really, really difficult to manage all of your specialists. Citizen Health takes a nice approach where they can bring it all together and make it accessible to parents in one dashboard. You can see current medications, you can see past medications. The simpler it is for you as a parent, the simpler it is for you to talk to your physician about like, hey, I'm seeing these issues, and they can understand what's happened over time and where they could potentially intervene. It's a very passive approach, so rather than having to participate in a study, it tracks data from each of your previous doctor visits. And this is the longitudinal approach of understanding over time what medications have changed, what blood results have changed, have ER visits increased in frequency or decreased in frequency, and how can we tie that together? So it's really a very creative approach to tackle this outstanding question of how do we get all of these data from all of these patients that look so different. SOAR is running their natural history study in a slightly different way. So they similarly are looking over time. So this is a 1-year study at this point with time points at initial time point, 6 months, and 12-month follow-up. And they're taking a very standardized approach. And what that means is that every kid that comes in to do the SOAR study is going to do the exact same assessments. Citizen is great because it's a shotgun approach. You can collect all the information, but kids aren't necessarily being seen in the hospital at the same times developmentally, whereas SOAR is addressing that really cleanly. They can understand at your initial time point, what was your cognitive score on this assessment? Let's look at 6 months, has that improved or has it gone down? And then look at 12 months, and we can track this, again, over kids up through adolescence. So it's a more standardized approach using a lot of these scales that are things that people like the FDA and companies need to advance and really understand our population to move a study forward. So now you're probably wondering, this is great, but why should I care? And I'm going to give you 3 reasons that you should care, besides the fact that it's really, really important to do these studies to get to a clinical trial. If you're looking at why should I care about natural history studies, one of the reasons would be to gain deeper insight into the health of our loved ones. Natural history studies are usually done in collaboration with some of the top experts in the field connected to Dup15q. Some of you have access to our clinics that are around the country, and some of you might not. For those of you that do have regular access to our clinics, you know that the quality of care that you get there is top-notch, and you know that the people you're talking to understand Dup15q in a way that's different from so many others. When you participate in a natural history study, you are talking to experts. You are talking to people who know the disorder, and you're talking to people who are very familiar and can understand and support in ways that a lot of people can't. As a parent, or I'll speak from my perspective, as a grad student working at a medical center, there were a lot of kind of early stage clinical trials. The phase 1s, is this medication safe? As a scientist, I felt an obligation to participate in that and support those initial studies to make sure medications were safe. And they were, and they moved on. One of the things that I thought kind of selfishly was great was I could get my blood results done every 6 months, and I could track how my health was over time. I got 2 or 3 MRIs of my brain. I didn't need an MRI of my brain, but I got to learn more about my health. And if something came up, I could get treated for it. What you see in a natural history study is you can track your kid's progress over time. You can understand, is this measure going up? Is it plateauing? Is that okay? Is that normal? You can understand the difference between a metric going up and a metric plateauing, and you can ask those experts, is this something I should be concerned about? That access to care is paramount as a parent to having that peace of mind that what you're going through is going to be okay. And natural history studies are a great way to access that kind of care. Why should I care about natural history studies, you might ask? Let's give you another reason. To improve our understanding of the future. We at the Alliance get questions like these on the left all the time. And it's hard because we don't always have answers. A question could be, hey, has anybody in this group tried medication A? How did your kid react? Was there an adverse effect, or did it improve behavior B? Right? You guys are all wondering these questions. I saw this other rare disease group. We heard 2 groups today that had ASO successes. That's amazing. But for some of the treatments that aren't ASOs that are more broadly applicable, I saw this other rare disease group they had behavioral success with this supplement that they were taking. Would that actually work in my child? It's a great question. We don't know yet. And we see this so many times, and I know a lot of these families in the room are first-time conference attendees, and it's likely because your kid was recently diagnosed. You enter the community and you say, here's my genetic report, here's my diagnosis, we see symptoms. What's my next 5 years gonna look like? It's hard to enter a community and have an unknown future. And the fact of the matter is that a natural history study is one of the best ways that we can understand what that future could look like, right? And this is kind of an idealized plot over here on the side. I'm not here to promise that this is what in 10 years we're gonna look like, but you can imagine if you get your genetic diagnosis, depending on what it looks like, we follow a flow chart that says, okay, how is your kid's cognition? Do they have epilepsy? Are they verbal? We can start to put these different pieces together and understand where you might fit into a bin where, hey, these therapies, these medications might be better, or maybe these other ones might not have the best response, and so we should look at other options. You know, clarifying what the future can look like and supporting each other in this room is one of the most powerful things that you can do, because I know that as soon as you leave this place on Saturday, you're gonna be, you know, one of the few. You're not gonna be around people who are going through the same thing that you are, like you are at this conference. So while you're here, it's a chance to make an impact for everybody else in this room, and even the families that weren't able to attend. Here's a third piece of reason of why you should care about natural history studies. It's to help the people that are developing drugs to help us. We heard earlier about developing ASOs and all the information that's important for pharmaceutical companies and biotech companies and the FDA to understand. What I'm showing you here on the bottom is an example of natural history data. It's not real data. This is just simulated, so please don't take what I'm saying as any sort of clinical diagnosis. But let's pretend we had a natural history study and we wanted to track the likelihood of a child speaking, developing speech, and we heard stories about how amazing improvements in speech can be in the course of a therapeutic. Let's pretend the Dup15q population, you've very little speech acquisition before the age of 2. And as your kid develops, about 50% of the population develops speech by about age 6. And then after age 6, we kind of see a plateau. We don't really see kids gaining or losing speech in this example. Let's pretend that's what the natural history study tells you. That is so much more information than we already have. And it takes some of these questions that the companies and the trial experts and we at the Alliance have that we can answer with studies like this. So question number 1, is speech a symptom worth treating? I know families in the room would say, yes, it is, but how do you prove that to someone? With a natural history study, you can say, yeah, we've got half of our population here in this example, 50%, that don't ever acquire speech. And that's a large proportion of a small community, but it's an impactful proportion. Drug companies, when they're developing a trial, want to know, how old should our target population be? If you came to the science discussion yesterday, the breakout panel, that was a conversation because how young can you dose a kid? Is there a point where it becomes too old to give a child becomes too old to give a treatment where it's going to have a measurable effect? And at this point, we don't think that's the case, but we don't have the data behind it. If we look at this graph trajectory, you have 2 thoughts. Number 1 is, hey, if we intervene before the age of 2, we have an opportunity to introduce speech at a time earlier than that kid may have an opportunity to develop independently. The other approach is saying, hey, we can intervene after 6 years old. And if we see any improvements, we can believe that that's due to the drug. We see this in Angelman when they had their trial. They compared, their placebo group was the natural history study. And they could say, oh, look, we saw gains. Is that a placebo effect? Is it because the kids were developing more? They compared it to natural history study and you saw really great results. So let's pretend that we give this trial drug to a 7-year-old and they acquire speech. Based on these data, you would say that that's due to the drug itself. It's not due to development within the child. And we can attribute that success to the medication, which improves our understanding of how clinical trial is succeeding. And that is so, so valuable because we're a small patient population. So every little piece of data that we can get is really, really important. This is an outstanding question. My background in cell biology and genetics is so interested in answering this, and the companies themselves are so interested in answering this question as well. Okay, 50% of our kids don't learn to speak. Why? Why? Can we develop that next round of therapeutics, the starlight effect? As these next rounds are coming up, what can we consider that could address the other 50% that don't benefit? Based on our natural history study and some of the other data that we collect, we can look at maybe there's a genetic effect. Maybe it's access to therapies. Again, are you going to one of our clinics where you get really good behavioral therapy, or maybe you're in an area where you don't have those type of resources. Maybe it's whether you have epilepsy or not. Maybe it's a comorbidity of another symptom. Maybe there's a biomarker that we can come up with and tell, hey, if you're in this high biomarker group, you're going to be more likely to respond or not. And maybe it's sporadic, but we don't know at this point. And frankly, that makes it really difficult for the people who are developing drugs to do everything they can without this full level of understanding. If you have a natural history data, like I said, this happened in the Angelman trial, you can lay a clinical trial result on top of it. So let's pretend in this example, again, hypothetical, we have a trial drug, and all of a sudden, the patient population on the trial drug has a speech trajectory that looks like this. That tells us, number one, our kids can learn to speak before the age of 2 with intervention. Number two, we are seeing kids in a population that are gaining speech more than they would have. And number three, if we start to look long-term, maybe this isn't a plateau. Maybe we have some of those older kids that can still benefit from treatments. So having this type of data can be really, really powerful in a clinical trial where we don't want our kids to get a placebo drug, right? It's hard to participate that and have them getting salt water, right? And a lot of these FDA modifications are put in place where we maximize the number of kids that get a drug, but we need to have something to compare it to. And natural history is, at this point, the best way that we can do that. I told you about 2 studies earlier. I talked to you about Citizen, I talked to you about SOAR. What I want to tell you also, and Sam alluded to this, is that we at the Alliance are working really hard because we see that this is an issue on developing a longitudinal natural history study ourselves. And I want to say that we're not here to compete with the other natural history studies because we're all going to work together on it, okay? But we saw something very, very important that we wanted to take into account. Of course, longitudinal tracking, I think I've highlighted that this is something that we do across all the natural history studies. We want to do this at regular time points over time. But one of the things that we're in a very fortunate position to do is interact directly with the pharma partners who are developing treatments for Dup15q. We are hearing from the pharma partners and they're saying, hey, we're interested in communication as a metric. Can you get a survey of how your patient population deals with communication? What are the levels of communication within the population? How are they adapting using communication devices to communicate? And how would communication impact a family in clinical trials? So we had a conversation on Wednesday with a few different pharmaceutical companies who are working and interested in Dup15q, and we're getting input from them on what they think is really important in a clinical trial, so that when we get there, we've already got our baseline measures. We understand what communication looks like. We understand what gait and motor function looks like. We understand what the epilepsy phenotype looks like. And that gives them a very nice baseline so that they get to clinical trials. It's much less work for them, and it's much easier on the patients. So we're in a really fortunate position as the Alliance to be that conduit between you, the voices of the families that are so, so powerful and impactful in a way that it brings people in this room to tears. Like the fact that you can have that impact and get that information translated to a company is powerful beyond measure. I alluded to this earlier, but our natural history studies are here, and they're not trying to vie and compete for families. These groups are performing natural history studies because they care about you. They're invested in patients, and they're groups that have backgrounds in the rare disease space, and they want to see us succeed. So I'm going to highlight these 3 studies again and just talk about some of the strengths that they have. So Citizen Health here has access to electronic records that have already been collected, right? You don't have to do anything. You sign up, and it does the work for you. It connects all of your records and pulls it together, and it doesn't require you to go into the clinic to do any visits. It's a very passive form of a natural history study where all the work is done on the back end by Citizen Health. And your effort is the 5 minutes to sign up. That's it, 5 minutes. And everything that's happened in your kid's lifetime up until this point medically gets pulled together, which honestly makes your life a lot easier too. We have the SOAR study done by our amazing team at CHLA in Los Angeles. They're looking at these standardized measurements. These are some of the things that the FDA and these companies really care about. And it's a way to track every patient the exact same way so that we can get a really clear understanding of our population. And it's aimed at improving clinical endpoints. So this is the idea of how do we know if a trial works or doesn't work, right? It means a lot to you to see some things like being able to swim, being able to talk. How can we get the FDA, how can we get these companies to understand what these meaningful endpoints to families are? Sure, your Vineland score could improve by 1 point, but what are the meaningful things that families want to see, and how can we find a way to quantify that to give the companies who, like me, like graphs? They like graphs, so we need to show them something that's going to impact and relate the things that you're seeing at home. Lastly, we've got this study that we're putting together here at the Alliance, again in tandem with all these others, where we're collaborating directly with the people who are developing the drugs. Help them, help us. That's our philosophy. And this is something that we'll be tracking longitudinally over time so that we can collect these really important data that matter to the companies and track it over time in a way that's meaningful. So this is a slide that I showed yesterday to talk about how you can help. I've already highlighted the 2 natural history studies, so the ways that you can help in these, Citizen Health has a booth right behind that wall. Take 5 minutes and please, please sign up. When I joined the Alliance, one of my first initiatives was to have half of our patient population signed up in the first 6 months by the time we got to the conference. We had 20% of that. We had a really poor turnout in people signing up for Citizen Health for something that takes 5 minutes. Please, please sign up. We had the founder of Citizen Health come here as a keynote speaker because we believe in their platform that much. And it really, really supports our families, and that's why we're pushing it so much. We have this SOURCE study, which required some pre-registration for some of the surveys, but a lot of these surveys can actually be done remotely. And so to access the SOURCE study, you're going to go down this hallway until you find an elevator. There's going to be signs, and you're going to find an elevator that's not in the mall. Because if you do these standard assessments inside a Sephora, you're not probably going to get the best results. But if you go to the SOURCE study place, you can get in touch with the experts who know Dup15q better than so many other clinicians in the world. You can get in touch with them, and we can start collecting these data so you can understand a little bit better about how your kid is performing over time. We had a study from Danny Miller, who was here. He's now since had to leave the conference, but he was collecting blood samples to look at DNA and changes in DNA in our patient population. And he reported back to me that he was looking just for 5 kids, and he got 8. So you guys hit that benchmark, and I really, really appreciate that you guys were able to do that. We still have study collection from Combined Brain. These are blood and urine samples that we're collecting. And again, this is a project in collaboration with the pharma partners. We have pharma partners that reached out to Combined Brain and nudged them and said, hey, we want to work with Dup15q, and we're interested in looking at their blood samples. We think there might be something in there that can tell us if our drug is working. Why would we not go running to the room to give blood so that we can help the pharma partners know if their drug is working? And if it is, we're that much closer, and we can move right along. So Combined Brain is still collecting samples on that front. And we also have a study run by the motor team, led by Rajuta Wilson at UCLA. And she's going to be downstairs. It's kind of tucked in behind that restaurant downstairs. But she's doing a really nice analysis of motor function in Dup15q. So how do our kids move? How do they walk? And this study is nice because our hope is that in the future we can use this as one of those clinical endpoints. Rather than walking on a gait map where our kids sometimes drift off or they wander, they don't walk super straight, she's using cameras that are set up so that your kid can kind of free roam in this little area, and we can track those things, and she has a nice program to quantify the results. The benefit of that is that if we get to a clinical trial and that becomes something meaningful, you can set your iPhone up on the windowsill, and you can watch your kid walk across the room, send her the video, and she can analyze it without you ever having to visit a clinic. How powerful would that be as a family to get these measurements from the comfort of your own couch? So she's working on developing a study so that she can improve our understanding of that in Dup15q. And ultimately, it's going to make it easier on the parents in the end run. So at this point, I want to take a moment from myself and from the Alliance to thank you for your participation and for listening. But I had to include this note here because I talked to all of our researchers yesterday. And I was just checking in, hey, I'm dealing with the science stuff. I want to make sure you guys are comfortable. You guys are getting what you need. And every single research group came back to me and said the same thing. They said, we are so grateful for the families that have signed up already for our trials because they are getting great enrollment. And they said, the only thing better than the enrollment we've got now would be getting the more families that haven't already participated to sign up for their studies. So from the team that's been performing all these research studies, they wanted to say thank you to the family, and I wanted to communicate that on behalf of all of them. Thank you for those of you who've been participating in studies. And for those of you who haven't yet, I want to encourage you that hopefully you've understood that there's a lot of reasons why we're backing this so hard and why we think it's going to be really important. So thank you all so much for your attention. I appreciate it.